I can still remember the sharp sting of that night, as if it happened only yesterday. The dining room glowed under the chandelier, the long table set like something out of a magazine. Silverware gleamed, crystal glasses caught the light, and polished roses sat perfectly arranged in the center. Guests chatted easily about travel and investments, their laughter rising like polished notes in a symphony. And there I sat, at the far end of the table, trying my best to look as though I belonged. I had brought along a pie I baked earlier that morning. Its crust was golden and warm, a small piece of myself I hoped might add something meaningful to the evening. But as I placed it among the glossy desserts from the finest bakery in town, I felt it shrink into invisibility, much like I was beginning to feel in that room. I smoothed the folds of my navy dress, listening quietly, smiling when it seemed appropriate, and telling myself not to draw attention. Ethan caught my eye for just a second, my son, my pride, my heart. He gave me a brief smile before turning back to his colleagues, and I thought maybe that small gesture was enough. Until the moment it wasn't. When Vanessa returned to her seat, her wine glass catching the light, she leaned forward with that polished confidence she always carried. In an instant, her words cut through the air, wrapped in a laugh that felt rehearsed and cruel. The room shifted. Forks paused. A few guests gave awkward chuckles, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. And there I was, sitting perfectly still, holding my napkin tightly in my lap, forcing my face into calmness while every part of me wanted to collapse. I felt the heat crawl up my cheeks, the sting rise into my chest. But I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I lifted my glass of water just to have something to do, though my stomach twisted so violently I could hardly swallow. Around me, the conversation picked back up, laughter resuming as though nothing had been said. But inside me, a bell was tolling, echoing again and again with every reminder of what had just taken place. By the end of the night, as guests gathered their coats and left with smiles, I stood near the door, hollow and quiet. Ethan kissed my cheek distractedly, his mind already elsewhere. Vanessa offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, and as I stepped into the cold night air, I felt the truth settle into my bones. In my own son's home, I had become invisible. That was the moment I realized this was not just about a dinner. It was about respect that had slipped away quietly, without anyone noticing but me. And as I drove home through the empty streets, my mind began reaching backward, piecing together the long road that had brought me here, the sacrifices, the love, and the slow erosion of my place in their lives. When I pulled into my driveway that night, the silence of my little house felt like a relief and a punishment at the same time. I set my purse down on the counter and sat in the same chair I had occupied for years, staring out the window at the dark street. Memories, uninvited but persistent, began weaving themselves together, pulling me back through time. I thought about the years after my husband passed, when it was just me and Ethan. I was in my 40s then, working full-time as a teacher, holding on to a mortgage, and trying to be both mother and father to a boy who missed his dad more than words could ever explain. Every morning, I packed his lunch before heading to school, and every night, I corrected homework and lesson plans at the same table where he finished his own. We leaned on each other, and somehow, we made it through. I stayed in the classroom for decades, shaping young lives with patience and structure. My paycheck was modest, but my pride was boundless. I never complained, because Ethan was my reason for every sacrifice. I skipped vacations, drove the same old car, and stretched every dollar so he could have opportunities I never had. When he walked across the stage at graduation, I thought to myself, it was all worth it. And then, years later, when I first held Tyler, my grandson, it felt like my heart had been given a new reason to keep beating. That boy's smile could brighten the heaviest day, and for a while, I thought I would always have a place in their home because of him. But as time passed, I began noticing the shift. At family gatherings, I became the quiet figure in the corner, asked to bring a dish but rarely included in conversations. The woman who once held everything together had become background decoration, tolerated but not valued. Still, I told myself to be grateful for whatever space I was given. I tried to find little ways to help slipping cash into Tyler's backpack for field trips, or saying yes when Ethan suggested Vanessa use my credit card just for emergencies. At the time, it felt like another small sacrifice for family. I didn't know it would be the beginning of something much darker. It all began with what seemed like a harmless request. Ethan had come by one afternoon, Tyler tugging at his sleeve while Vanessa scrolled on her phone. He spoke gently, almost casually, suggesting that it might be helpful if Vanessa had access to my credit card. Just for emergencies, he said. Things like groceries if they ran short, or school supplies for Tyler. He framed it as convenience, not necessity, and I wanted to believe it was simply a way to make life easier for all of us. I hesitated at first. My finances weren't extravagant, but I had always managed carefully, stretching dollars to make them last. Still, when I looked at my son's face, I remembered every moment of sacrifice that had brought us here, and against my better judgment, I said yes. After all, what harm could it do? The first charges were small, a few extra bags of groceries, a pair of sneakers for Tyler, gas for the car. I told myself it was fine, exactly what Ethan had said it would be. I even felt a little glad that I could help, as though my role in their lives still mattered. But slowly, things began to change. One month, I noticed a spa charge. Then a dinner bill at a restaurant I knew Ethan wouldn't have chosen. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe Vanessa had treated herself after a hard week. Maybe they were celebrating something. But as the weeks passed, the charges grew bolder: designer clothing, salon visits, and jewelry that gleamed on Vanessa's wrist the next time I saw her. Each time the bill arrived, I sat at my kitchen table, scanning the list with a growing weight in my chest. I wanted so badly to believe it was a misunderstanding, that surely Ethan wouldn't allow his wife to take advantage of me this way. And yet, every number told a story I didn't want to hear. Quiet hurt seeped into me like water through cracks, subtle but unrelenting. I told myself to let it go, to keep peace, to not cause waves. But unease began to take root, and I could no longer deny that something was wrong. I was being used, not appreciated. And the weight of that truth was building toward a breaking point I could feel approaching, whether I was ready or not. It was past midnight when I found myself still awake. The house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I couldn't sleep, not with that heavy envelope sitting on the counter. The credit card statement had arrived earlier that day, and I had placed it aside, too afraid of what I might find inside. But fear doesn't stop the truth from existing, and eventually, I knew I had to face it. I tore it open under the harsh kitchen light, the paper trembling in my hands. My eyes scanned the numbers, and with every line, I felt my stomach twist tighter. There it was in black and white, thousands of dollars in charges. Not just the occasional indulgence, but a steady stream of luxury high-end salons, weekend getaways, a boutique I'd only ever passed by because the prices in the window were beyond anything I could imagine spending. I sank into the chair at the table, the paper shaking between my fingers. My heart pounded in my ears, a mix of disbelief and fury. How could I have been so blind? I had convinced myself these were small things, manageable, excusable. But now, staring at the total, I felt the sting of betrayal so deep it seemed to cut through bone. The tears came hot, but beneath them was something sharper. Anger at Vanessa for using me, anger at Ethan for letting it happen, and anger at myself for trusting too much, for sacrificing all these years only to be treated like a wallet instead of a mother. The clock ticked steadily toward 01:00 as I sat frozen. The bill spread across the table. Somewhere inside me, a quiet voice rose up, steady and unyielding. I could not keep ignoring this. I could not keep allowing myself to be diminished. That night, under the cold kitchen light, I realized something had to change. The time for silence was over. In the days that followed, the sharpness of my pain began to dull into something else, something steadier, something stronger. I had spent the first night sobbing over that bill, my tears staining the paper. But by morning, I felt a different current running through me. It wasn't despair anymore. It was resolve. I thought back to the years I spent in the classroom, standing in front of rows of restless children who needed structure, patience, and boundaries. I had been the one to enforce discipline with calm authority, never shouting, but never backing down either. If I could command 32nd graders every day for decades, surely I could take back control of my own life. So I began. Every afternoon, I sat at the same kitchen table where I had once helped Ethan with his school projects, now covered with folders and neatly stacked papers. I went through each credit card statement line by line, highlighting charges, writing dates, noting patterns, a spa visit here, a restaurant there, then clusters of extravagant spending that added up to numbers I could hardly believe. I kept everything in order, careful and precise. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't rushing. I was methodical, almost like preparing lesson plans for the most important class of my life. My lawyer's card sat tucked neatly at the corner of my folder, a quiet reassurance that I wasn't alone in this fight. For the first time in months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. Each page I filed away was a reminder I had value. My life, my savings, my years of sacrifice, they were not to be squandered or taken for granted. I felt a calm strength returning, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. And as the binder grew heavier with evidence, so did my conviction. I didn't know exactly when the confrontation would come, but I knew it was inevitable. And when it did, I would be ready. The next family gathering was already approaching, and I sensed it would be the moment where silence finally gave way to truth. The next family dinner came on a Saturday evening, and I walked through the door with a calmness that surprised even me. The house was warm with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of Tyler's footsteps running down the hall. I greeted everyone politely, settled into my chair, and folded my hands neatly in my lap. No one would have guessed what I carried with me: pages of evidence, a binder of truth, and a heart that no longer trembled. Vanessa floated into the room late, her hair freshly styled, her nails gleaming, her wrists flashing under the chandelier. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to question the bill at the end of the night. And then, without hesitation, she began to boast. She laughed lightly as she described her recent afternoon at the spa, complete with champagne, facials, and treatments that sounded as though they belonged in a glossy magazine. Everyone chuckled along, admiring her glow, and she basked in the attention as though it were her birthright. But as her words spilled across the table, my mind clicked into place. I had seen it before. The same date, the same charge, right there in the thick packet of statements tucked safely in my binder at home. Her little story of indulgence was not just a story, it was proof. I kept my face still, my expression calm, even as my heart hammered steadily in my chest. Outwardly, I smiled faintly, passing the breadbasket when asked, nodding at the conversation as though nothing stirred inside me. But beneath the surface, I was burning. Every laugh, every casual mention of another luxury only strengthened my resolve. I said nothing that night. Silence was my weapon, patience my shield. For the first time, I felt no fear about what was to come. I had the truth, and the truth would speak louder than I ever could. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. The night finally came when silence no longer felt like strength, but like surrender. I invited Ethan over on a quiet weekday evening, choosing the time carefully so Tyler would already be in bed, and Vanessa wouldn't be able to dominate the conversation with her polished charm. It was just the two of us, mother and son, sitting at the same kitchen table where I had once taught him his multiplication tables. I placed the binder between us and opened it slowly. Page after page, highlighted in careful lines, every charge laid out in neat columns. My voice was steady, calm, almost like I was teaching a lesson again. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I simply walked him through the numbers: this spa visit, this dinner, this boutique purchase. Each one matched to a date, a statement, a receipt. Evidence no one could dismiss. At first, Ethan tried to glance away, but the weight of the pages forced him back down into the reality spread before him. I could see the shift in his eyes, the dawning recognition that this wasn't just a few mistakes. It was a pattern, a violation of trust. Before he could gather his words, Vanessa's voice filled the room. She had arrived midway through, slipping into a chair across from me with a dramatic sigh. She tried to spin it, brushing it off as misunderstandings, suggesting I had overreacted. She talked of family, of generosity, of how money was meant to flow. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes sharp. I let her speak, waiting until the room settled again. Then I closed the binder gently and looked at them both. My words were simple, deliberate. I told them the card had already been canceled. The account was closed, and before they could protest, I added that I had spoken with my lawyer, who had assured me I had every right to protect myself. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Ethan stared at the table, his face pale, while Vanessa's composure cracked for the first time since I'd known her. I felt no triumph in that moment, only clarity. I wasn't a victim anymore. I had taken back control, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet power of standing on my own 2 feet. The moment the words left my mouth, the room erupted. Vanessa shot up from her chair, her voice climbing higher with every sentence. She spoke of betrayal, of humiliation, twisting herself into the role of the wounded party. She clutched at Ethan's arm, demanding he see how unfairly I had treated her, how cold and calculating I had become. Her dramatics filled the kitchen, but I no longer felt rattled by them. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, letting her fury echo off the walls. Each accusation washed over me without landing. I had already heard enough over the years, enough subtle dismissals, enough cutting remarks disguised as jokes. This was simply the mask slipping. Ethan sat between us, torn. His face shifted from shock to guilt to confusion. I could see the boy I had raised inside the man who now struggled with the woman he had chosen. His loyalty pulled him in two directions, but I no longer felt the need to compete. My place was not something to beg for. When Vanessa finally paused for breath, I rose from my chair. I spoke softly, firmly. I told them I had nothing more to say, that the evidence spoke for itself, and that my boundaries were no longer negotiable. Then I picked up my binder, slid it back into my bag, and walked toward the door. My movements were calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped out into the night air. Leaving behind the storm I refused to be caught in any longer. For the first time in years, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. Pain, yes, but also relief. By choosing dignity over argument, I had chosen myself, and that decision would change everything. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself replaying everything in my mind, the dinner tables, the careless words, the mounting bills, the confrontation. For a while, I wondered if I had been too harsh, if perhaps I had misunderstood. That's the old habit of mothers, isn't it, to second-guess ourselves, to soften our anger, to believe that love excuses everything. But as the hours stretched into days, a different truth began to settle inside me. Love without respect is not love at all. It is convenience. It is exploitation dressed up as family loyalty. And I had spent too many years mistaking silence for harmony. Too many years shrinking so that others could feel bigger in my presence. At 71, I realized something powerful. It is never too late to claim your worth. Boundaries are not walls that push people away. They are doors that protect what's sacred inside you. For decades, I had taught children about responsibility, honesty, and respect. Yet somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to apply those same lessons to myself. Now, I walk a little taller when I move through my own home. I smile more easily when I see my reflection, not because life is suddenly perfect, but because I know I am no longer allowing myself to be diminished. Independence has a sweetness I had almost forgotten, and dignity feels like oxygen after too many years of shallow breaths. I don't know what the future holds with Ethan and Vanessa. That is their road to walk. But I know this: I will not apologize for demanding respect. I will not apologize for protecting what I have built with my own two hands. And I will not apologize for finally choosing myself. If you've ever found yourself in a place where love felt like obligation, where family meant being taken for granted, I want you to hear me clearly. You are worth more than silence. Respect is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And it is never too late to draw the line and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it touched you, I invite you to share your own experiences in the comments. Let's remind one another that our voices matter. And if you believe in the power of respect and boundaries, don't forget to like and share this story, because sometimes the lesson we learn in our own lives might be the very one someone else needs to hear.